Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's so good to see everyone who's joining us today. Um, I think we definitely have a few more folks joining, but we can go ahead and get started. I'm Erin Frederick. I'm the executive director of the Hometown Project. And it's really amazing to see all of the wonderful people that are here. I see organizers and artists and donors and researchers and state leaders and just a lot of really wonderful people who care about democracy and that are all here to understand how we can rethink voter registration. And so we're really excited to share our data-driven roadmap to save our democracy. And we kind of need some saving right now. But look, I don't have to tell you all that the stakes are really high. I feel like, in the wake of the Calais decision, and every day I feel like we're all seeing another court ruling after another that undermines the Voting Rights Act or feels like it's stripping away our rights. And it can be really overwhelming. And so this is what today is all about, is to be able to focus on there's really important ways forward that we're hoping to shed some light on and help point you in the right direction today. So I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar along with HeadCount. We're two organizations that care deeply about voter registration, about democracy, and at the cross section of culture. We come from a highly creative, folks at Hometown come from a highly creative world, film, television, theater, and that's a very collaborative medium. And we love to bring that into the democracy space and make sure that we're working together towards the same goals. And that's something that is HeadCount's shared values. And we're just really excited to share this all with you today. I'll also say that we came to know HeadCount after someone said, "Well, you do really effective work, and HeadCount does really effective work. Can you get together and do a program together?" And we said, "Sure." But geographically, we wanted to understand a little bit more. Where do we start? And who are the populations that we need to register? And so that's what this research and presentation is all about. We started collaborating with them on commissioning the research, publishing the report that you'll get in the coming days, and then also putting together the materials we'll share today. So if you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat, and then we'll try our best, as to answer them at the end. So without further ado, to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Golden Globe nominated actor, activist, and advisory board member of the Hometown Project, Piper Perabo.
Thanks, Erin. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that as Americans, we occupy land originally and continually inhabited and cared for by Indigenous peoples. Whatever region you're joining us from today, let's take a moment to honor the Indigenous stewards of this land, past, present, and future. And if you don't know what specific tribal lands you occupy, I invite you to take a moment to visit the link in the chat. Let's take just a moment together. Thank you. As land acknowledgements remind us, democracy in this country is deeply tied to place. It's rooted in community, and it has a history of leaving people out of the decisions that shape their own lives. That's part of what makes today's conversation so important. Real democracy only works when it's representing everyone. But right now, millions of eligible people are missing from the electorate. Their absence shapes policy and in turn determines whose voices are actually heard. So two of my favorite orgs, the Hometown Project and HeadCount, came together to ask a simple but urgent question. If we truly want a more representative democracy, where should we be focusing our energy and our resources? So drawing on data from 50 states, they created a practical guide for where voter registration investments could have the greatest impact in 2026 and beyond. It's not a report about problems, it's a roadmap toward the solutions. We're going to start with presentations on some of the key findings from the report. And if you have questions that come up during the presentation, you can put them in the chat and we'll answer them in the Q&A at the end of the hour. But first, let me introduce you to all of our presenters. You've met Erin Frederick, Executive Director of the Hometown Project. Also presenting will be Lucille Winagime, Executive Director of HeadCount, Peter Sillett, Hometown's founder and advisory board chair, Tapan Vikri, HeadCount's VP of Program and Strategy, Tom Bergen, HeadCount's Director of Voter Engagement, and HeadCount's Voter Engagement Associate, Beckett Hummer. Peter, could you talk a little bit more about the Hometown Project's mission, and then we'll turn it over to Lucille for some background on HeadCount.
Sounds good. Piper, it is great to see you and great to see everyone on the call. I can see a bunch of familiar names here. I'm Peter Sillett. I'm a musician. I am the founder of the Hometown Project. And for those of you that don't know much about the Hometown Project and what we do a lot of different things, but our core concept is very simple. We get well-known people, so famous actors, musicians, authors, chefs, to support local causes and campaigns in their hometowns. So if a state-based grassroots organization wants to reach voters in a compelling way with messaging that feels authentic and localized and community-oriented, we facilitate the involvement of those famous faces. We call them hometown energizers. And for example, Piper, who you just heard from, has made many videos and appearances in her home state of New Jersey, motivating voters. And let me tell you, when Piper shows up at an event in Monmouth County, a lot of people attend. There's a lot of excitement around it. Speaking of excitement, I'm really excited about this report. You'll hear a lot more detail in a second, but for me, I do think there's real opportunity that's evident in the data here. On a national level, we can tend to think of swing states as being somewhat static. And but the reality is that things can change. They can change slowly. They can change rapidly for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the hard work of so many of the people that are on this call. So I'm hoping this report can help you and your organization, not just for this election cycle, but for the future. We partnered with HeadCount. We love HeadCount and the team there. Because, you know, as Erin mentioned, they share our values in terms of working in collaboration and community and effectively working with musicians and artists in their mission to register voters. So to speak more on that, I'll turn things over to HeadCount's Executive Director, Lucille Winagime.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucille. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very grateful that you've given us your time and your attention. So I get to tell you a little bit about HeadCount. I get to shout us out a little bit. So HeadCount is a national nonpartisan organization, and we use the power of music and culture and community, and we turn fans into voters. That's kind of our simple sort of headline. But we meet young people where they already are. So concerts, music festivals, online, and we make it easy to register to vote, to learn about elections, and in general, like to take action. And we know our shared value, I think, with us and for the folks over at Hometown is that our country's future really depends on younger generations showing up in democracy. And HeadCount just gives them the tools to join that conversation. So we're really excited to have been doing this for it's 22 years now, which is kind of wild. And so in that time, for over 20 years, we've worked to, of course, register, but also engage and turn out voters in all 50 states. We have a truly national program. But this report helps answer a really crucial question, right? So where can those efforts have the biggest impact when it comes to equalizing representation? If you're a part of the pro-democracy movement, you're often thinking about equality and equity and how can we be using our, it feels like always finite resources to have the most impact that we can. And what we found is that there are opportunities to tip the scales toward a more representative democracy. And we know that those avenues, those opportunities are beyond the traditional battleground state framework. And so for us, we're always thinking about how do we make sure that we are looking out for the folks that aren't going to be, at the top of everyone's list in terms of investment, right? Because your attention is also where you tend to invest, and we've definitely seen that there's some underinvestment that can be sort of corrected for as part of this research. And for us, we always want to make sure it's solution oriented. Piper mentioned this at the beginning. And so I get to also share the fact that there are real opportunities here. So there are opportunities that are well within reach. This is not a report that comes in and says, here are all the things that are wrong, figure out how to fix it. We do have some real recommendations here and strategic action points. And so we're really hopeful that this can be a resource for the entire pro-democracy movement, not just us, not just Hometown, but that's another reason why it was really important for us to do this work in partnership with the great folks at Hometown Project. And hopefully this is able to generate even more collaboration in our space, brighter ideas, better coalitions to do this work, because none of us solves this problem alone. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Tappan, who will get us into some of the data.
Thank you so much, Lucille, and it's great to be here with y'all. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this data. The first time I saw a version of this was in 2024, and it immediately sparked so much energy and ideation around innovative ways to target and mobilize young voters. Which is HeadCount's primary target. This report goes a little bit beyond that, but as I think it's going to show up in 1 second, there we go, I will get into a little bit of this information. So the first thing, before we get into the data, I wanted to talk a little bit about our scoring rubric. So all of the information that we're providing y'all today is publicly available information. It's not all in one place. What makes our take on this interesting is that we've gone through and we've looked at these different action points, different data sets, and assigned a score to them that adds up to 100. And as we go through the report today, we're going to present each one of these source areas, which will eventually lead to the 100-point total at the end in the big list. But you have to stay until the end to get the big list. So first things first, go ahead, Erin, thank you. This is the combined ranking for voter registration opportunities based on voter registration gaps for young, Black, Hispanic, and Asian eligible voters. We've thought about these as two separate groups, and I'll apologize for the census data now. They do not have data sets for the entire diversity of America, but they do for Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters. So that is one grouping. And then we're also looking at voters who are 18 to 34. So within this is a 40-point potential assignment, and we've also tiered it out. So those that are tier 1 have the highest opportunity for voter registration and the biggest voter registration gaps. And you go through and you see tier 2 and tier 3, and you'll see these tiers for each of the different data sets we're presenting. So I just want to say before we move to the next thing, you may think, oh, this is what I would expect. There's a lot of the usual suspects, but as you see and we progress, you'll see this list change and evolve a little bit to see additional opportunity. Next slide. So within the 40 points, we also wanted to focus on young voters. So in 11 states, more than 40% of eligible young people are unregistered. That is a tremendous amount of people that could sway a whole bunch of local, state, and federal elections. Their power is tremendous. Next slide. Voter registration is one of the most effective ways that we can generate turnout and mobilization. We also know from census data that once registered, 85% of young people will vote. That's in presidential years. It does go down a little bit for midterm, state, and local, but it continues to be the largest mobilizer that we can use. So within that 20-point margin, I wanted to just present the top 10 states. So to make up the 20 points, we looked both at the top 10 states by percentage and then also by population. And you can see between these two lists, again, some of the usual suspects at the top, but you do see folks show up that if you just looked at the metric by percentage or by unregistered population might not be there. For example, North Carolina, incredibly important. Our friends in Arkansas are showing up high on this list when you look at percentage. So my home state of Alabama is on here. A lot of interesting ways to look at this data and find opportunity. So when we go to fun facts for looking at the eligible voters of color, in 6 states alone, more than 1 million eligible voters of color are unregistered. That is just like completely unacceptable, I feel like. I feel like we've got to do better than that. And we need to find ways to mobilize and engage folks in these places. Again, the top 10 lists here, I think you'll see the same dynamics. It's really important to also note that the Gen Z is the most diverse voting bloc in the history of our country. So there is a lot of overlap between the young voter list and eligible Black, Hispanic, and Asian people. And so the dynamics are similar and is another reason to look at that initial map and target folks together. This does not even touch on the emerging voters. And with that in mind, I'd love to pass it off to Beckett Hummer from HeadCount's voter engagement team to talk about those who are entering the electorate for the first time.
Hello, everybody. My name is Beckett. I'm from HeadCount, and I'm going to be focusing on pre-registration and that emerging population of voters. So, according to census data from 15 to 17-year-olds, there's about 13 million emerging new voters that are coming in. So, the top 15 of these states include Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. Only about half of these states, however, allow for emerging voters to pre-register at 16, and that's a clear solvable problem that could change the tide of the next presidential election and contribute to a more representative democracy. We can go to the next slide. Great. Where pre-registration is available, however, we need to build up more awareness. If you're waiting for potential voters to turn 18 before you try to reach them, you're already too late. If 18 is too late to reach potential voters. If a state has pre-registration available at 16 to 17, a perfect time to reach them is within high school. And that means that every single high school that you have within a state that has pre-registration is available for pre-registration because at least half that high school is going to be 16 or 17. Democracy does not happen one election at a time, as you see by these different ages on the screen. Every state is different, and so we have to reach every state differently. So it's, again, if you're waiting for potential voters to turn 18 before you try to reach them, you are too late to reach them. Pre-registration can help counteract barriers that prevent underrepresented eligible voters from participating in the democratic process. By focusing our attention on addressing and overcoming these barriers now, we can pave the way for a stronger democracy in the years to come. By focusing on the voters before they even become eligible voters. Which brings us to the issue of online voter registration access, which I'll pass it to Tom from HeadCount to talk about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beckett. So the online voter registration access piece of this research is accounted for in 10 of the 100 points, much like the pre-registration. So if we go ahead and bring up the data for this, we can see that online voter registration is honestly one of the greatest and most useful tools for bridging gaps in voter registration for any demographic and any population, because it breaks down barriers of having to print out, mail in, and hope that your voter registration form is received. And so we think the gold standard for online voter registration is what 8 states have, which online voter registration is available to all voters in the state, regardless of if they have an in-state ID or not. So this is amazing because it makes online voter registration about as accessible as possible to voters. And we will see in the next slide the map of these 8 states. The majority of states, however, have an online voter registration portal that has significant barriers to it. That being the only way to utilize the portal is if you have an in-state ID. So when we are thinking about the populations that we conducted our research focused on, both young voters and Black, Asian, and Hispanic voters, we know that there are a number of studies that these two populations are ones that have in-state IDs at lower rates than national averages. And so thinking about the barriers that exist, we know that this is a gap that can be changed because there is a blueprint in these 8 states that you don't have to have an in-state ID to register to vote online. And so thinking about ways in which we can make the online voter registration portals that exist in those 28 states more accessible is a really important thing for us to be considering. And then lastly, unfortunately, our tier 3 for online voter registration access are states that do not have any online voter registration. And so these are states where voter registration processes must take place with pen and paper, and that, as we know, can be incredibly burdensome on voters. And again, particularly when thinking about our 2 populations that we focused on. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a map of what the online voter registration access looks like in America. And so this is just a snapshot of, again, those tier 1s, tier 2, and tier 3, the majority of states having an online voter registration portal that requires an in-state ID, but those purple states being those ones where there's a really incredible opportunity to pursue digital campaigns to help educate folks that, like, hey, even if you just moved here and you have an ID from your old state, or you need to go to the DMV, like, you don't have to wait until that happens in order to register to vote in your state in 1 or 2 minutes by using your online portal. And so the online voter registration piece is kind of the last piece of our 100-point puzzle. And so I'm going to, or it's not, so I'm going to hand it over to Aaron to talk about the potential impact of kind of all of this data when we put it together.
Thanks, Tom. The last section, actually, when Tappan took us through that rubric of the different criteria and different populations that we were looking at, the last one is electoral impact. That's 40 points. Essentially, what we did to factor to that is we looked at, we're talking, again, this is a nonpartisan presentation, but in many states, the number of unregistered voters exceeds potential victory margins. So essentially, in 4 states, when we're talking about electoral outcomes, in 4 states, Texas, Georgia, Florida, and Illinois, each of them this year have a U.S. Senate seat, a gubernatorial seat, state House, and state Senate. And they also have an unregistered youth, Black, Hispanic, and Asian populations that exceed the potential margin of victory. And so essentially what we did and what our lead researcher and analyst Nicole did was looked at previous election results in 2024, sometimes it was in 2022, but really kind of synthesized those together and created a projection for the margins of victory for each of these states that we'll see. So for example, there are 9 states, and again, not your typical battleground as we're talking about. States like New York, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Nevada, California, New Mexico, Connecticut, and South Carolina. They all have very important races this year. These folks, the ones in this column, have 3 out of 4 of those races that I spoke about. And then they also have a large youth, Black and Hispanic and Asian populations that exceed the margin of victory. And I'll show you what that looks like. In addition to these states, we have 18 states that similarly have an unregistered population that exceeds the margin of victory. This is both in communities of color and then in youth populations, we have 28. So there is an enormous amount of untapped power here. And you can see that really visually here. Texas, for example, we all know there's very important races that are happening in Texas this year. That's a tricky one. It still is at the top of many lists in this report, even though it doesn't have online voter registration, as Tom mentioned, simply because it marks all of the boxes in the other areas. So the projections for statewide margins are 883,443. But look at the amount of potential unregistered youth and communities of color we see on this chart. 2.4 and 3.7 million. So organizing efforts there are obviously extremely important. And you can see similar sort of ratios in Georgia, Florida, and Illinois with these important races. And then this slide shows you again a state like California, which has the, as Tom mentioned, they were a tier one on that list. They have availability for, they don't require a state ID, so it's more accessible, and digital campaigns could be highly effective there in closing the registration gaps. Because really, again, what this is all about is working towards a more representative democracy. So when I say that, actually, I'll go back to this for a minute. So when we talk about this whole rubric that we've been considering, it really is essentially, sometimes it's certain populations that are over-indexed, over-counted, and it's very clear when you see this data that there are certain populations and certain states that are undercounting people. We don't have a truly a democracy that's reflective of our population. And so that's what our goal is in trying to share this all with you. So this gets us back to voter registration gaps and the emerging electorate, access to voter registration online, and potential electoral impact. That's how we got to this 100 points. So this essentially, this is our sort of top 10, if you will, of where there is the greatest need and the greatest impact. A lot of orgs that are joining us, some are like truly grassroots and trying to make a difference in their state. And what we hope is that this can really be exactly what we said, a roadmap for you to look at and really say, okay, let me dig down and see what's happening in my state of Pennsylvania, or, to see, some of this you may know, obviously, and some, the detail in here is going to be really, hopefully just gives you a leg up as you focus on voter registration efforts this year. And with that said, I think we're wrapping up. Here we are. Let me just show you this. This is our sort of final map, which gives you a lay of the land of the tiers of priority. And again, yeah, some of these states, it's going to be a little bit of a steeper hill in terms of the organizing that needs to happen. But there's clear opportunity in many of these states. And so to take us through a few sample sets, I'm going to pass it back to Tom, who can talk to us about some of the state profiles that we looked at for this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. So I will start by just kind of highlighting the fact that we chose these three states for um, a couple of reasons. One, they had data that was really salient when we looked at kind of all the numbers at large, but two, because they are a great kind of snapshot of three very different types of states. And so we want to present these. We obviously, we could sit here and talk about all 50 states, but I don't think anyone has the time for that. So we kind of wanted to use the three states that we're going to talk about, North Carolina, Arkansas, and Connecticut, as a snapshot of how this data and research might be used to kind of create a roadmap or to gain better information for a state that you might be interested in. So with North Carolina, there are a couple of really key pieces that popped out with this research. So the first is that North Carolina ranked 34th for voter registration rates amongst 18 to 34-year-olds. And this number pairs really importantly with two other additional pieces of information. The first is that there are only 4 states that have more young residents aged 18 to 34, and North Carolina is ranked 9th nationally for future voters aged 15 to 17. So when we put all that together, we see a really clear picture of there are a lot of young people who are prime and ready to be registered to vote who are not currently being reached in North Carolina. The next piece is that the same kind of story rings true with the Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters in North Carolina. So North Carolina ranks 29th for voter registration rates amongst the 50 states. And very similarly to young voters, there are only 5 states that have more voters within these populations. So again, the narrative is there are a lot of people who are not currently being engaged and registered to vote and brought into the democratic process amongst both of the identities and populations that we researched. And probably the most crucial piece of all of this is the last point, that North Carolina has incredibly close elections all of the time. Everyone on this call is probably familiar with the fact that they have statewide elections that are decided by 700 votes pretty regularly, and state and local elections sometimes have even smaller margins. And so When putting all of this together and thinking about the fact that there are so many people within these populations that we were able to research that are not currently registered, there are such close elections and there's so much money being brought into the state of North Carolina, there is a immense opportunity for bringing more folks into the democratic process here. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is just kind of a very salient, easy to understand graph that shows you how many unregistered voters are in each of the populations and how few people are estimated in the vote margin for 2026. So there's a lot of folks that can make a really big impact in North Carolina this year. The next state that we looked at was Arkansas. And Arkansas has a couple of different pieces than North Carolina that came out to us when we were looking at the data. So if we go ahead and populate the first data set, this is the most important number to us in Arkansas, the fact that 53.44% of 18 to 34-year-olds are registered to vote in the state, which means that Arkansas ranks 50th nationally for young voter registration rates. They have nowhere to go but up, which is a great opportunity. And similarly, a little bit better, but not by much, Arkansas ranks 43rd nationally for the voter registration rates of Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters. So again, kind of the same story of there are a lot of people who are not currently being engaged in Arkansas and who are ripe for being brought into the democratic process. I believe there's one more piece. Yes, okay. So in-person voter registration and engagement is really critical in Arkansas because Arkansas doesn't really have online voter registration. There's currently a court case that has allowed for online voter registration to exist for like the current moment in Arkansas, but historically and probably in the near future, Arkansas will go back to being a state that does not have online voter registration access for voters. So acknowledging the fact that there are a lot of people who need to be registered, and the best way to do that in a place like Arkansas is on that very localized level of bringing things to communities and having trusted organizers in the very, very micro scale will kind of be what helps push these numbers hopefully up in the years to come. And then we can go to the next slide. And again, there is just one more graph to look at of the citizen population versus registered voters and how many folks actually voted in comparing young people and voters who are elderly of 65 years or older. And you can see that there are pretty large discrepancies there between the young voter turnout and the elder voter turnout. And so kind of that overestimation or overrepresentation of young voters or of older voters compared to young voters. And then we'll go ahead and look at our last state, and that state is Connecticut. And in Connecticut, the biggest thing that popped out in our research is that Connecticut scored 75 out of 100 in our combined impact and opportunity score. And this number was really interesting to us because Connecticut was actually the highest ranked state that did not have one of two identities. It was not one of the most populous states in the country, like a California or a Florida, and it was not a battleground state. And so we were like, there's something interesting here. And we can go ahead and look at the next point and see that one of the biggest pieces of this kind of opportunity is the fact that Connecticut ranks 44th nationally amongst Black, Asian, and Hispanic residents who are registered to vote. So again, kind of thinking about this population has the opportunity to have great impact in Connecticut elections, and currently is not being brought to the table in representative ways compared to other demographics. And again, just kind of a note to think about with Connecticut in particular, it's a really small state. And so there's a great opportunity for in-person testing because you could be in a rural community and an urban community and everything in between in like a 90-minute drive, which is not the case for many states in the country. And I will just kind of end the state profiles with this graph of what the voter registration percentage rates look like of white or non-Hispanic alone voters in Connecticut versus Black alone or in combination. And you can see that very large, almost 30%, or actually exactly 30% difference between the two populations. So there's a lot of work to be done. I will just end with one piece that I forgot to mention earlier of we chose these states because they had interesting data, but also because North Carolina is known as a battleground and like a true purple state. Arkansas is known as a very solidly red state, and Connecticut is known as a very solidly blue state. And so we thought that it was really interesting that regardless of what type of politics make up the state, there's an opportunity to bring more people into the Democratic picture. And so, yeah, so this type of analysis can be done with any of the states with the research that we did, but we just wanted to bring these three forward. And so with that, we are going to open it up to questions and see if anyone who is attending has any questions about the data or the presentation of the data or anything at all. So please feel free to throw any and all thoughts in the chat if you do have any questions, and I will kind of facilitate it to the rest of the presenters to answer them. And if you don't have questions and we answered everything and you're like, this was such a great presentation, thank you so much. We'll go ahead. Erin, go ahead.
Sure, sure. I was just going to say, we can wrap, but I also do see that someone posed a question. The high school piece is definitely critical to having a captive audience. And the question is, which orgs are doing a good job of registering or pre-registering in high schools? And I'm not sure if we know that. I know there's a number of them who are working and doing work in high schools. Maybe that's something that Tappan or Tom want to
Yeah,
address.
I would just jump in. There are many, very many that are doing it, but two that come to my mind is the Civic Center, which was just dropped in the chat, but also New Voters, which is a Gen Z Love initiative. Both of them give high school students training and resources to run drives at their school. So it's like an integrated program and great professional development opportunities as well. So those are two that I think are very strong and national in scope. So you could find them just about anywhere. And I would also say that our friends at the League of Women Voters, their local chapters are in the high schools like everywhere and have been for forever. I think they have seen this opportunity for a long time. And so I would be remiss to not acknowledge that in many places they champion this work and don't have the same fanfare because of their kind of disaggregated structure.
And I'll also add that HeadCount is doing really amazing work with young people, and we're actually working on trying to put together a program with HeadCount and Hometown together to kind of use their tried and proven tools and our tried and true proven approach and content creation to be able to drive more registration and working with folks at those organizations that are also doing really important work in pre-registration. So I just wanted to flag because we're working with HeadCount because they're doing an awesome job.
Wonderful. The next question that we have received is from Alexis Dorman about receiving state-specific data and understanding like what's happening on a state level, specifically in Florida. So is there a way for individuals who attended this or who are reading the report to receive or take a look at their state's specific data?
I think the answer to that is absolutely. I'll just go ahead and field that one. But Tom, if you want to pop in and answer what I don't. But yes, that's the goal of this. We want to make sure that this information is public. The report that we share, I think we're going to circulate it either tomorrow or Monday to everyone on this call and those that couldn't attend. And you can feel free to share it. You'll be able to see, dive down a little deeper into the appendix, which have a lot of data. But we can also work with you one-on-one if you're interested in seeing maybe some of the back end data that may not be included in the report. We're excited to share that and help you out in your state.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just add that please, 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 we have in the report to email info at both HeadCount and the Hometown Project. Please email us if there's something that you want to just like hop on a 30-minute call and we can discuss and work through the data together, because there's a lot of it and we would love to sift through it with you and figure out how it might be most useful to the voter registration work that you are doing. The next question that we have is from Chloe Mister, and that question is about the data itself. So I think Tappan, I'll probably send this one to you. but it asks, do we have data showing whether voter registration gaps vary significantly within the broader racial categories that were used for this report? So for example, are there ways in which we can see differences between Hispanic or Asian origin communities?
100%. That is census data, and I would be happy to help anyone who's interested interpret it and show you where it is. We did combine for the sake of this report, but that definition is available. They don't have, like as I mentioned at the top of the call, they don't have all of the different people groups that I wish that they did in the census data, but these three are those that we can address.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The next question that we have is from Morgan Howard, and I'm reading it in real time, so I'm going to kind of synthesize. But the question says, when it comes to the state-based testing, would you say that these areas are also potentially lacking as many major event spaces to bring community get together? So probably in thinking about both HeadCount and the Hometown's mission of building this community and having community spaces, throwing an event there might be tougher on tours or routing or budgets, but that might mean that there's a potential for an excitement of any sort of event to take place because there might be a lack of that cultural kind of movement or engagement happening.
Yeah, I'll hop on that one, Morgan, although I feel a little bit, and I'll get Peter or Aaron to back me up on it. But I think it's like really important to recognize that it's not only that like routing isn't putting like events there for like our concerts, it's also that there's like not easy to get to places and there are not a lot of places to host events of that size and scale. So that's where the digital piece like really comes in and creates an organizing footprint and opportunity that has no limits because as we all know, 98% of people have a smartphone, regardless if they have a computer or internet. So, you know, I think that leaning into the digital organizing piece and using not just social media, but also like, you know, wikis and other sorts of places where we can do really targeted messaging in those places can fill the gaps. I do think if we could figure out ways to throw awesome events in Arkansas, I was actually just talking to a gentleman who's a friend of mine that I didn't realize was from Arkansas about cool things that we could do together there. And but like that's a long-term plan, and I think that we need to have something like more sustainable where we can start using digital tools to like continue to increase voter registration.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tappan. Um, I will put out a final call for if anyone has any additional questions, and we can give it just a couple of seconds in case anyone is currently typing anything in the chat. But if we don't receive anything else, I will hand it off to Aaron for the last word.
Ooh, the last word. That is a big responsibility, but no, it's thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen on this last moment. Once I do that, just give me a minute. Here you go. So essentially, you know, and certainly if you have questions that come up, don't hesitate to reach out. You know, you should have our emails and contact information from when we invited you all to this call. So really what we're looking at is that when we sort of came to the task of where should we register and who should we register, it really does matter on so many fronts. If we want a representative democracy, we really have to make sure that we are investing in places and people and approaching them with digital first tools, with meeting people where they are, because we're not always doing the best job at communicating to the people that need to hear it. And that we need to reach and bring into the democratic process. So that's sort of one of the clear takeaways. Again, we addressed Louisiana versus Calais. There's very clear ways that this is impacting places, not just places like Alabama, which is going through their own legal battles right now, and obviously Louisiana, but places where there are deliberate attempts to fracture voting populations And voter registration is a way that we can create a bulwark of that. We can make sure we're reaching the right folks to be able to hold on to what it means to have a representative democracy. And there's a lot of further research that we hadn't touched on today. We wanted to make sure we gave you this overview, but and the work that we've done so far, but there's certainly more work to do. I think you all had mentioned one of the questions around, sort of how do we look at other populations in more detail? The other gap that we have is how do we break down a state in more detail? I'm really excited about potential work in places like Arkansas and North Carolina, where we can see the state as a whole, but then we can start to look at county level and sort of further down to be able to really approach and build program around where it's needed. So HeadCount and the Hometown Project are doing fundraising efforts right now to be able to actually use the work that we're talking about and apply it in real life programs on the ground. So if any of you are in that space, in the funding space, or in the organizing space on the ground in Arkansas, we always like to have work in collaboration. So if HeadCount and Hometown are working together, we work in multiple states, but we really focus on a state-based org or entity that we can work together. So there's a lot of information in the report that you'll see around further research needs and sort of ways that we can dial down further. And so I'll also add that um, uh, there's calls to action that all of you can do. If you're an organizer in your state, building up your voter registration program, if there is a need, this report can help you do that and help you have a place to start. And then there's other simple calls to action. Look, California, it's much easier to register. I'm coming to you here from, the Hudson Valley area in New York, and New York is a highly democratic state. When I hang up, I could call Kathy Hochul, and I don't know her personally, but make some noise about making voter registration more accessible. Even in red states, even in blue states, there are places where we can work to advocate, to lobby, to break down those barriers. And there's a lot of clear things in the report about that. So that's just one call to action, but I think everyone on this call has ways where they can mobilize, and we can help point you in the right direction if you don't, but there is something to do in each and every state. And it might be a different direction, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I'll stop that share now, but yeah, that's kind of where we landed with that. Tom, did you want to field some of the other questions that we have here? Or
We're all good.
we're all good. Okay. Great. Great. Thank you all for coming today. If any of the other panelists want to jump in and say a last few minutes, great. I think we're going to bring everybody up on the screen, but I really hope this was valuable to everyone. And we're going to circulate the report in the next coming days.
I just wanted to say thank you as well. And, I think from HeadCount's perspective, we always run a national program. We really believe in the power of the youth electorate. And I think it's just so essential that we all take time to invest and think about ways that we can reach all of these margins of voters who are not being served by a current system, because every single one of them has a story to tell, has a life experience. And if we were listening to each other with those stories and experiences and had representation for them, I do believe that our democracy would thrive. And that's why this work is important to us. And I hope it is to you all too.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. It's so inspiring, so exciting to be together and talk about this work.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Hope to hear from you.
Keep up the good work.
Yep.